Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Manufacturer's Blueprint, Solving the US and EU Battery Compliance Puzzle. Let's see, are we seeing our webinar platform tips? Okay. I just want to start out with a little bit of housekeeping and give you some orientation about the webinar platform before I introduce our speakers for today. So the webinar slides are available to your left side of your screen, along with a few helpful links if you'd like to explore and learn more about compliance and risks, how we can help you simplify and accelerate your compliance processes. We want this webinar to be as engaging as possible, so please send us any questions that you may have, and we will aim to address them during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. If you would like to submit a question, for the Q&A session, use the Ask a Question widget, which is on the left side of your screen. We'll also follow up with you directly for any questions we don't get to answer during today's session. So at any time, if you're interested in having a member of our team follow up with you, don't hesitate to use the Start a Conversation button at the bottom of your screen. And last but not least, the webinar recording will be sent to you within the next 24 hours. So introduce myself, I'm Kerry Whalen. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Compliance and Risks, and we are joined by a couple of our best and brightest, Andrew O'Neill, who is a Regulatory Compliance Specialist with Compliance and Risks. Andrew is focusing on batteries and wireless technologies and toy safety, and he brings over a decade of experience in regulatory enforcement across Irish national authorities, including roles with the NSAI and the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission. His work today centers on helping companies interpret global regulations and stay ahead of evolving compliance requirements. And then alongside Andrew, we have Dealer Sin as a Senior Regulatory Compliance Specialist here at CNR, advising on AI, batteries, and pressure equipment regulations. A qualified lawyer in Turkey with over 10 years of experience, she leads global regulatory projects and supports clients navigating complex international requirements. She's also actively involved in AI policy, contributing to global initiatives focused on responsible AI governance. So I'm happy to have them with us today. So before we kick off the webinar, I'd like to provide a little background of compliance and risk for those of you who are joining the series for the first time. At Compliance and Risk, our mission is to help ensure global companies have the tools and information to build safe, sustainable products in a world full of change. Here we have the world's most compliance regulatory database with over 115,000 regulations, historically available in our C2P platform. With global regulatory coverage and expertise over 10 industries, we understand that regulatory compliance doesn't sleep. And I'm sure most of you don't sleep either. But our regulatory experts team is truly global, and we have 28 languages collectively spoken across the team. And we're fortified with over 30 knowledge partners. So our C2P platform is our enterprise software designed to keep global organizations on top of regulatory changes and their impact worldwide. So this includes early warning alerts, impact probability, productivity workflow tools, and so much more. So with that background, I would like to introduce Andrew.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. So today we'll be talking about how the United States is navigating the patchwork of state EPR through battery stewardship programs. I'll run through what is proposed and approved at the moment, why this is happening. We'll look then by state, and then we'll see if there's like a blueprint emerging across these states for battery stewardship. And then we'll show then some timelines. And then Dealer then will take us on to basically transition into a global sustainability benchmark from directive to regulation, the lifecycle approach, supply chain due diligence, digital innovation, and circular design. So moving on. So in this session, I want to look at the growing momentum behind battery stewardship legislation in the US. and in particular, why so many states are now moving in the same direction at roughly the same time. This is no longer a niche policy discussion. Battery stewardship is becoming a major compliance issue for producers, importers, and brands selling batteries and battery-containing products in the US market. What I'll cover today is where the legislative momentum is coming from, what the common features across states look like, how companies can think about this increasingly fragmented patchwork, and why one state's model is starting to influence the structure of others. I'll also close with a practical view of near timelines and what we can expect next. So across the US, we are seeing a clear increase in state activity around battery stewardship. Some states already have enacted frameworks in place, while others are in proposal or kind of approval stage. What is important is not only the number of states involved, but the pattern. These are not isolated legislative experiments. States are watching each other, borrowing concepts and refining existing models rather than starting from scratch. If we look at states shaping the conversation, most clearly Washington, Vermont, the District of Columbia, and Colorado stand out. Washington is widely seen as the most operationally developed modern framework. Vermont is important because it's expanded its stewardship model beyond traditional primary batteries into rechargeable batteries and battery-containing products. DC is also significant because it's moved clearly into battery-containing products and producer participation through a stewardship organization. And Colorado is one of the strongest examples of a newer state that's adopting very similar stewardship architecture to the other states. We're also then seeing activity in other states besides these with draft bills and proposals that follow the same broad direction, even where the exact scope or timing differs. So from a regulatory monitoring perspective, the message is battery stewardship is becoming an active and expanding area of state EPR law, and companies can no longer assume that this is limited to a handful of outlier jurisdictions. So there are several drivers, but the most immediate and politically powerful one is safety. Lithium-ion batteries have become a growing source of fires in waste trucks, recycling facilities, transfer stations, and landfills. As the number of battery-powered products in the market has grown, the risks associated with improper disposal have grown with them. This has turned batteries from a simple waste issue into a public safety and infrastructure issue. The second major driver is cost. Local governments and waste operators have been absorbing the operational burden for battery collection and disposal for years. Household hazard waste programs, retailer take-back points, and occasional collection events are expensive, inconsistent, and often not convenient for consumers. States are increasingly concluding that people placing these products on the market should finance the end-of-life management system. The third driver is resource recovery. Batteries are not just a hazardous waste concern, they're also a source of valuable recoverable materials, including critical minerals and metals, that give lawmakers an environmental and an economic argument alongside the safety one. And then there's finally a simple policy momentum. Once a few jurisdictions establish a workable model, other states find it easier to adopt and then adapt that model. So the recent push is not just about rising battery volumes in circulation, it's also about legislative confidence. Policymakers are now feel that a battery stewardship framework is both necessary and feasible. So at a practical level, states are trying to solve several connected problems. First, consumers often do not know how to properly dispose of batteries, especially rechargeable batteries and embedded batteries inside products. Many batteries still end up in household waste or recycling streams where they create fire and contamination risks. Collection infrastructure is fragmented. In one area, there may be a retailer drop-off point. In another, there may be municipal collection. and in another, very little at all. The inconsistency undermines the effectiveness of the whole system. There's no strong financial mechanism in many states to ensure that collection, transport, sorting, and recycling are funded in a stable way over time. Battery stewardship laws address these issues by shifting responsibility upstream, instead of relying on local governments or consumers to piece together a disposable pathway. The producer-funded system is designed to create a more systematic statewide collection and recycling structure. So when we talk about battery stewardship, what states are really doing is building an end-to-end end-of-life management framework that combines safety, financing, convenience, and accountability. Now, from an industry point of view, this creates a familiar US compliance problem, the patchwork. There's no single federal battery stewardship law. Instead, companies need to track multiple state programs, each with its own definitions, thresholds, dates, obligations, and enforcement approaches. That said, it's not a total chaos. The patchwork was real, but there's substantial convergence. So, for example, Washington and Colorado follow a very similar model based on producer participation through a stewardship organization and an approvable plan. Vermont and DC are also highly relevant because both move more clearly in the regulation of rechargeable batteries and battery containment products. So while each state has its own legal details, the broad structure is becoming more familiar from one jurisdiction to the next. In most cases, companies will need to assess at least 5 things on a state-by-state basis. First, who qualifies as a producer? This often means the brand owner, but in some circumstances, it can shift to the importer or distributor. Second, what products are in scope? Some laws focus on portable batteries first, while others address medium format batteries or battery containment products. Third, what the stewardship mechanism is. Usually this means joining an approved stewardship organization or complying through an approved plan. Fourth, what the timing is. Some obligations soon after enactment, but others phase in over several years. And lastly, the marking and reporting or registration requirements look like. So the patchwork is manageable, but only if companies take a structured state-by-state compliance mapping approach. Even though states differ in detail, the similarities are becoming increasingly important. Most modern stewardship laws follow a shared logic. They define a producer category. They require participation in a stewardship organization. They require an approved stewardship plan, establish collection and recycling obligations, and the support system through producer funding. Many states also use similar battery categories, particularly portable batteries and increasingly medium format batteries. They also tend to use similar exclusion concepts, such as exemptions for certain motor vehicles or medical applications, or batteries with free liquid electrolyte. However, another major similarity is the requirement of convenient and accessible collection. States are not just imposing financial obligations, they're trying to ensure that the consumer-facing system also actually works. Annual reporting is also another recurring feature. States want measurable outcomes. That often means collection volumes, program performance data, education efforts, and financial transparency. So while companies do not need to watch state differences, so while companies do need to watch state differences carefully, they should also recognize that the underlying architecture is becoming more standardized. That creates an opportunity to build scalable and internal compliance frameworks rather than reinventing the wheel for every jurisdiction. Now, despite that convergence, there are still important differences that companies could not ignore. One major area is scope. Not every state covers the same battery types, and not every state includes battery-containing products in the same way. The treatment of embedded batteries and products with integrated power sources can vary significantly. Another key difference is thresholds. Weight and watt-hour limits may look similar across many programs, but even small definitional differences can affect whether a product falls into a portable or medium format category. Also, timing is another major point of divergence. Some states move quickly from enactment to implementation, while others build in longer transition periods or later phase-ins for certain categories. The role of retailers and collection sites will also vary. Some frameworks place stronger obligations or expectations on collection of networks rather than others. And then finally, enforcement provisions can differ in strength and in style. Some states rely heavily on prohibitions on sale for non-compliant producers, while others focus more on reporting failures, planned approval, or civil penalties. So when companies hear that the state laws are convergent, they should not be taken to mean that they are interchangeable. The trend is towards harmonization, but the legal details is still what matters a great deal. So one of the most important developments in this space is this legislative blueprint that's starting to emerge. So rather than creating an entirely original framework, states are increasingly taking on the existing model and modifying it. That is exactly how EPRs actually often mature. First there's experimentation and then there's replication. What makes this significant is that once one or two state models become dominant, they start to shape the language, definitions, and operational expectations across broader market. That's good news and bad news. The good news is that increasing similarity can make future compliance more predictable. It become easier to design national stewardship strategies when states use familiar categories and structures. The challenge is that once a model becomes established, new states can adopt it quickly. That can accelerate the pace of legislative expansion. So from a strategic perspective, companies not only track which states have laws today, they should also understand which implementation model is becoming influential, because that model is likely to reappear in future proposals. So when one state successfully implements a battery stewardship program, it becomes more than just one jurisdictional requirement. It becomes more of a proof of concept. So at the moment, Washington is probably the most important state to watch. Its framework is one of the most developed modern models in the US, with detailed requirements and stewardship organizations. It has approved stewardship plans, statewide collection coverage, phased approach to different battery categories. The level of implementation detail makes Washington especially useful as a template for other states. And then Vermont is also highly influential, particularly as an early stewardship model that expanded beyond traditional primary batteries into rechargeable batteries and battery-containing products. That made Vermont kind of important in the foundation of how broader battery stewardship framework could work in practice. So then we have Colorado, which this shows that newer legislation is beginning to replicate what was behind the last two states. So Colorado reflects the direction newer states are taking. So producer responsibility through stewardship organization, backed by an improved stewardship plan, covering collection, transport, processing, and recycling. So the best way to approach this is not to treat every state as completely separate compliance exercise, but also not to assume that they are all interchangeable. Instead, companies should start by building a central compliance framework around the elements that are now appearing again and again across state programs. Those common elements usually include identifying who the producer is, determining whether the product is in scope, joining or working through a battery stewardship organization, understanding plan and reporting obligations, and reviewing any marking or registration requirements. Once the core framework is in place, the next step is to layer on state-specific variations. That is where companies need to pay particular attention to things like the definitions of batteries, the weight, the watt-hour thresholds, whether the battery contains products that are included, implementation dates, and then differences in enforcement or sale prohibitions. So in practical terms, the most effective strategy is to prioritize the states that are shaping the market most clearly, such as Washington, Vermont, and DC, and then use those as a foundation for a broader US compliance model That allows businesses to move from reactive state-by-state approach to a more scalable and forward-looking system. So the key message is the patchwork is real, but it is navigable if companies focus on building strong core compliance structure and then adjusting for state level differences rather than starting from zero each time. So looking at timelines, the near-term outlook is clear. More states will continue to evaluate or introduce battery stewardship legislation, and producers should expect continued momentum rather than slow down. So in the near term, companies should focus first on the states already shaping the framework, most clearly Washington and Vermont, DC, and Colorado, because these jurisdictions are setting out the tone for how battery stewardship obligations are being structured in practice. This is the stage where internal product mapping, producer status analysis, and scope review become critical. In the medium term, we're likely seeing broader inclusion of battery-containing products, continue refinement of portable versus medium format battery categories, and more states adopting phased implementation schedules rather than immediate full-scale programs. And then in the longer term, the US may still remain a state-level led system rather than moving quickly towards a single federal framework. But even without a federal legislation, a de facto national model may emerge through repeated state adoption of similar EPR structures. So the future outlook is not just more laws, it's more laws built on increasingly familiar foundations. That means preparedness now will matter. Companies that build flexible compliance systems early will be in much stronger position with those responding state by state only after the laws are enacted. So here are the key takeaways. First, the current push towards battery stewardship in the US is being driven by real pressures: fire risk, rising waste system costs, and the growing importance of resource recovery. This is happening now because the market has changed and the policy model has matured. States now see stewardship as both necessary and workable. The state-by-state patchwork is real, but there are enough common features emerging that companies can begin building scalable compliance strategies. So one state's implementation can have outsized influence because successful operation models quickly become drafted templates for other jurisdictions. Right now, Washington is probably the clearest example of that, with Vermont providing an earlier foundation, and then Colorado showing how the architecture is actually being used. So the direction of travel is clear. Battery stewardship is becoming a durable feature of the US regulatory landscape, and companies should treat this as a forward-looking compliance priority rather than a temporary legislative trend. And then the last question I'll ask is, if most states are implementing near identical frameworks, could a federal law be on the horizon? So there is federal policy developments and clear interest in a national consistency, but at the moment, momentum is toward voluntary federal frameworks and continued state-led legislation, not an imminent nationwide mandatory stewardship law. So I'm excited to watch this space and see how it develops. Thank you. And I will leave you now to my colleague, Diligence.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It was really good to hear about US because it's super complicated. So again, hi everyone. Today I will talk about the EU battery regulation specifically with you. As you know, the new regulation introduced many key changes. So let's start with the most important conceptual shift. We have moved from a directive to a regulation. So under the old batteries directive of 2006, each EU member state could implement the rules in its own way. That meant 27 different national approaches, different interpretations, different enforcement priorities, right? For manufacturers selling across the EU, this created a patchwork of compliance obligations. The new regulation changed that entirely. It's directly applicable in all member states from the moment it enters into force. No transposition needed, no national variation, one rule, one market. But it's not just the legal structure that changed, it's the scope. The old directive was fundamentally about what happens to a battery when you throw it away. The new regulation asks what happens before that? How was it made? What carbon was emitted? Where did the cobalt came from? Were there child labor in that mine? This is why it's not a recycling regulation. It's a full cycle. It's a full life cycle regulation. Your compliance obligations now begin in the design room and the procurement department, not just in the waste management process. The old directive was formally repealed on 18th of August 2025, last year, but there are some transitional rules still in place. So let's learn a bit more about this regulation, right? This regulation applies EU-wide, as I mentioned, and covers all batteries, both as a product and batteries in a product. It imposes obligations on economic operators, placing batteries on the market or putting them into service. So what economic operators mean? Economic operators are any natural or legal persons involved in making batteries available or putting them into service in the EU. The regulation assigns responsibilities across the battery life cycle, including manufacturing, importing, distributing, and fulfillment. Article 3 of the regulation gives the definition for each of the economic operators you see here. So let's go through each of them to understand them better. Let's begin with the easiest one, manufacturer. So manufacturer is the one who designs, manufactures, or markets batteries under own name or trademark, or puts into service for own use. When we come to the supplier of battery cells or modules, is the one who provides core components, which means cells or modules that generate and store energy. Authorized representative is the one who acts on behalf of the manufacturer within the EU for specific regulatory obligations. An importer is the one who places batteries from non-EU countries onto the EU market. And distributor is the one who makes batteries available on the EU market, excluding manufacturers and importers. And lastly, the fulfillment service provider is the one who offers services like warehousing and dispatching without owning the batteries. So now we have an idea about what all of them are. So now we get into the substance. One of the most transformative aspects of this regulation is the mandatory carbon footprint declaration. Let me be clear, this is not voluntary ESG reporting. This is legally required information that must accompany your battery onto the EU market. Article 7 introduces the first mandatory standardized life cycle carbon footprint declaration for batteries in the EU. It applies per model and per plant, making it highly granular and data intensive. And calculations must follow the product environmental footprint based life cycle assessment rules and be verified by a notified body. So it's a true compliance obligation. As I mentioned, it's not ESG reporting. The data becomes available. The data becomes public via a battery passport, and this will increase the transparency across the value chain. And importantly, this is just the first step. It will evolve into carbon performance classes and binding limits, directly impacting market access. So for EV batteries, electric vehicle batteries, the carbon footprint declaration requirement has been in effect since the 18th of February last year, meaning if you are placing EV batteries on the EU market today, you're already required to have this in place. For industrial rechargeable batteries above 2 kilowatt hours, that deadline was February 18th this year. So companies in that space need to have their carbon footprint calculation ready right now. What does this actually require? So manufacturers must calculate the carbon footprint generated across the entire battery production process. Raw materials, manufacturing processes, transportation, and so on. This needs to be declared per battery model, per manufacturing plant, as I mentioned. So the next phase introduces performance classes. It means rating batteries by their carbon intensity, similar to an energy label, and this kicks in after the battery passport is in place. Under this regulation, which sets sustainability and circular economy requirements for batteries across the entire life cycle, recycled content targets are introduced to ensure a share of key materials in new batteries comes from recycled sources. So the regulation sets binding minimum percentages of recycled cobalt, lithium, nickel, and lead in new batteries. These start in 2031 and step up significantly by 2036. For cobalt, the jump is from 16% to 26%. For lithium, from 6% to 12%. So these are not aspirational targets, they are enforceable thresholds. This is important. And the advice is to manufacturers is to start your material traceability systems now. You cannot calculate recycled content without knowing the origin and processing history of every material in your battery. When we move on to the supply chain due diligence, it's one of the areas where regulation has seen the most significant recent development. First, let me explain what does due diligence cover. The four critical raw materials you see here: cobalt, lithium, nickel, and natural graphite. These are the minerals most associated with problematic sourcing, such as Congo cobalt mines where child labor has been documented, the Chilean lithium operations in water-stressed indigenous territories, and Indonesian nickel extraction linked to the deforestation. The regulation requires companies to implement a full due diligence program, which means written policy, risk identification, risk mitigation strategies, third-party verification by a notified body, and public reporting. One more nuance from recent developments is that there is a pending proposal to exempt companies with turnover below 150 million euros, so-called small mid-caps, from due diligence obligations. This hasn't been adopted yet, but it signals the direction for smaller operators. The Commission guidelines expected in mid-2026. So there have also been important updates, again, regarding the battery due diligence obligations. First one is the application date has been postponed by 2 years and will now take effect on 18th of August next year. And secondly, the Commission's due diligence guidelines, originally expected last year, but now scheduled for publication on 2006 of July this year. In addition, a proposal would raise the turnover threshold from 40 million euros to 150 million euros, as I mentioned, but with the Council suggesting an even higher threshold of 200 million euros. We'll see. This is, both of them are proposals. And finally, the proposal would reduce administrative burden by changing the reporting requirement from annual publication to once every 3 years. And now, let's move on. Yeah. The most transformative innovation of this entire regulation is the digital battery passport. It's the mechanism that ties everything else together. To understand the digital battery passport, it's helpful to start with the broader concept of the digital product passport, which we call DPP. So the DPP is introduced under the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, which again we called ESPR, and represents a horizontal framework that will apply to a wide range of products placed on the EU market, right? Its purpose is to make key information such as sustainability data, material composition, or circularity performance digitally accessible through a product's entire life cycle. Within the broader framework, the most advanced and concrete example we have today is the digital battery passport. Under the EU battery regulation, it's the first legally binding, fully defined and sector-specific implementation of a digital product passport in the EU. From 18th of February 2007, certain categories of batteries placed on the EU market must be accompanied by a digital battery passport, accessible via QR code, physically affixed to the battery. These battery categories include electric vehicle batteries, light means of transport batteries, such as those used in e-bikes, e-scooters, and electric mopeds. And the third one will be the industrial batteries with a capacity exceeding 2 kilowatt hours. This industrial category is quite broad, covering not only large battery energy storage systems used for grid stabilization, but also batteries powering equipment like electric forklifts or autonomous mobile robots. Other battery categories, such as portable batteries or SLI batteries used in conventional vehicles, are not subject to the full digital battery passport requirements. However, they are still subject to transparency obligations. They must also carry a QR code, but this QR code will link to a more limited and static set of information, mainly focused on safe use, disposal, and recycling. Overall, the digital battery passport is expected to serve as a blueprint for how digital product passports will be implemented across other sectors in the future. So the requirement for the digital battery passport is restricted to specific high impact categories. However, all batteries, including small portable ones, are required to bear a QR code. And as I mentioned, the key distinction will be while the QR code is mandatory for everyone, what it links to depends on the battery category. And actually, what we can do is, for the batteries that fall outside the scope of the battery passport, specifically portable batteries, SLI batteries, and industrial batteries with a capacity of 2 kilowatt hours or less, the QR code must link to essential compliance and safety information rather than a full passport. So here is how it will look like. According to Article 13, for these batteries, the QR code must provide access to general information, declaration of conformity, waste management info, and reporting. So let's move on to, about the circular design. As you know, there's also a removability and replaceability requirement. So under the EU battery regulation, starting 18th of February 2007, batteries in products must be readily removable and replaceable by the end user. That means no special skills or proprietary tools or risk of damaging the product. And this applies mainly to portable batteries, e-bikes and other light means of transport, and industrial batteries under 2 kilowatt hours. There are some exemptions. Partial exemptions include wet environment products and certain medical devices, and end users don't remove the batteries themselves, but independent professionals can. Full exemptions are rare and cover safety critical products or products where removing the battery would destroy critical data. The EU Commission can also grant additional exemptions or derogations if the manufacturer provides a strong technical justification. And finally, even when removable, batteries must be replaced using commercially available tools only, no heating, no solvents, or proprietary methods. In short, these rules are designed to balance sustainability, safety, and user convenience, and any exemptions or derogations must be documented in the technical files. Let's walk through the latest developments in the EU battery regulation. There are several important updates, and each is aimed at improving sustainability, transparency, and consumer rights in the battery sector. And the first one you see here introduces standardized data reporting. This legislation defines exactly how data related to waste batteries must be reported. It specifies the format, the calculation methods, and the operating rules that companies must follow. The aim is to create a consistent and transparent reporting system across all EU member states, making it easier to track and compare battery waste management data. The second one you see here focuses on harmonized recycling methodology. This regulation lays down the rules for calculating recycling efficiency rates and material recovery rates for waste batteries. It also explains how these calculations should be verified and documented. By harmonizing the methodology, the EU ensures that all companies follow the same standards, improving reliability and comparability of recycling data across the market. Moving on to removability and replaceability addressed in the notice, as you see as the third one here. This is a major step forward for consumer rights and repairability. As I mentioned previously, portable batteries must now be user swappable, which gives consumer more flexibility and reduces electronic waste. And also, the European Commission has released some key draft measures that are still in the consultation phase. These include the methodology for calculating and verifying the carbon footprint of EV batteries, ensuring that all companies report environmental impacts consistently. There is also a defined format for carbon footprint declarations and standardized templates for certain labeling requirements. These draft measures are crucial for achieving transparency and comparability, particularly as the EU moves toward stricter sustainability targets and the wider adoption of electric vehicles. And when we come to the key takeaways and next steps, let me close by bringing together the 5 themes from today into the actions that your organizations need to take. This regulation is a binding law in all 27 EU member states. There is no national flexibility, no implementation grace period for welcome. There's no implementation. And also, if your battery is sold in the EU, this applies to you regardless of where you manufacture. The regulation is already in effect. CE marking, extended producer responsibility, and labeling obligations have been live since 2024. And if you are placing EV batteries on the market, your carbon footprint declaration is already required. If you are in industrial rechargeable batteries above 2 kilowatt hours, the carbon footprint obligation kicked in this February. Due diligence has been postponed to 2027 by the amendment published last July. But I cannot stress enough that don't use this as a permission to wait. Supply chain mapping is not a spreadsheet exercise, so it requires engaging suppliers and building data systems. So it's better to start now. And of course, the digital battery passport is the central, most important thing of this regulation. So everything you're done on carbon, recycled content, supply chain, and end-of-life reporting feeds into the passport. You have time until 2007, but building the underlying data infrastructure will take a lot of time. So if you haven't started, today is the right day to start. And for the next steps, start with a gap analysis this quarter, map every battery in your portfolio, assign it a category under the regulation, and assess which obligations apply and where you stand today. The baseline is your compliance roadmap. And thank you all for joining today. Now we can take the questions if you have any.
Thank you, Dila and Andrew, and thank you everybody for your attention so far. We have opened the floor for some Q&A questions. I do see some in the Q&A widget. So let me start with one that I think is for you, Andrew, which is, which companies are most likely to be considered the producer under these state battery stewardship laws, and the brand owner, importer, or distributor?
Yeah, so in most cases, the brand owner is the first entity likely to be treated as the producer. If there's no in-state or US-based brand owner that's taking responsibility, that obligation then often shifts to the importer, and then in some cases it can fall further down the supply chain to the distributor or the retailer. The definition varies state by state, so companies should not assume that the same entity will be the producer in every jurisdiction. So from a practical compliance perspective, the key step is to kind of map who was placing the battery or battery containing product on the market in each state, and whether another party in the chain is already assuming that obligation. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Dila, I think this one's for you. The regulation mentions mandatory levels of recycled cobalt and lithium. Since these targets don't become active until 2028, do we have any documentation obligations regarding recycled content in 2026?
Okay, it's a good question. So the short answer is yes. Even though the minimum levels aren't mandatory until 2028, you're already required to declare the amount of recycled content in your technical documentation for industrial and EV batteries. You must have an audit trail from your suppliers now to justify the percentages you claim on your 2026 carbon footprint and sustainability declarations.
Awesome, thank you. Actually, we have one more for you, Dila. We're already labeling our batteries with QR codes for 2026 requirements. Will these same QR codes work for the digital battery passport mandate coming in February 2027, or do we need a new system?
Well, you can use the same physical QR code. The data architecture behind it must be changed by February 2007. Currently, the QR code mostly points to static regulatory info. By 2027, it must link to a dynamic passport containing live data like state of health and updated cycles. So you should ensure your current IT infrastructure is passport ready to handle these additional data fields without needing to relabel existing stock next year.
Nice, thank you. Andrew, I think this one is for you. How similar are the various state battery stewardship programs in practice? And is there enough alignment for companies to build one scalable compliance approach?
So yeah, like there is increasing alignment, and that is one of the most important developments in this area. Most modern state programs use the same core architecture. So if you're the approvals and the drafted builds, they all have a defined producer. They have participation in battery stewardship organization. They have an approved stewardship plan, producer funding, collection access, and they also have reporting obligations. It means that companies could build kind of a scalable internal compliance framework around those common elements. The laws aren't identical, So how scalable that framework still needs like a state level customization for your scope, your thresholds, your time and your label and your enforcement. But the best approach would be to build one central foundation of what everybody needs and then kind of add on then what's specific then to each state.
Nice, thank you. Dila, as of last month, February 2026, the carbon footprint declarations are mandatory for rechargeable industrial batteries under 2 kilowatts. If our specific model's declaration is still in progress due to supplier delays, can we continue to place these batteries on the EU market?
Well, since the 18th of February this year, deadline has passed. So a valid carbon footprint declaration is now a requirement for the CE marking of these batteries. So placing them on the market without this verified documentation constitutes a compliance failure, which can lead to market withdrawal orders or fines from national market surveillance authorities. So no, the short answer is no.
Thank you. Okay, let's go back to Andrew. Here's another question. Are battery containing products being pulled into scope in the same way across states, or is that still one of the biggest areas of divergence?
Yeah, it is one of the biggest areas of divergence. The overall trend is clearly toward a broader inclusion of battery containing products, especially where lawmakers want to address embedded batteries that consumers are likely to remove before disposal. But states do not all define or regulate battery containing products the same way. Some are further ahead and explicitly bring them into scope, while others remain more focused on standalone batteries or kind of like a phased in broader categories to bring it in more gradually. For companies, this means battery containing products kind of deserve separate analysis rather than being treated as automatically covered or automatically excluded.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have time for one more, and this one's for you, Andrew. Which states should companies prioritize first from a compliance planning perspective over the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, so they should prioritize the states that are already shaping the market most clearly. So particularly Washington, Vermont, DC, and Colorado. But Washington is especially important because its implementation structure is kind of emerged as the clearest operational kind of blueprint. And then Vermont is highly relevant because it has a broader stewardship scope. So that's kind of gives you a kind of larger framework to work with because it includes rechargeable batteries and battery containing products. And then you don't then want to look at Colorado then because it shows how newer legislation is then adopting, say, legislation that was kind of used by Washington, by Vermont, and then pulled them together. So in practical terms, if a company builds like a strong compliance strategy around those states first, it'd be better positioned to kind of respond as the similar states adopt the law for battery stewardship.
Awesome, thank
Thanks.
you. We are getting to the top of the hour. We have a number of questions still that have come in. So our regulatory experts will be able to sort through those and get your answers to you after this webinar. We really, truly thank you for tuning in with us today. We hope you found our presentation helpful. We look forward to seeing you in upcoming webinars. You can check out our resources section on the website to stay updated and to access our latest white papers, blogs, webinars. We have plenty of upcoming content, so make sure you keep an eye out. Our next webinar is April 8th, and that will be titled Mixed Signals, Managing Product Compliance in an Era of Instability and Growing Divergence. So we hope to see you there. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.